You're the reason your father left. My mom mocked. Everything wrong with my life is because of you. She screamed. I was silent, until I read aloud the letter Dad left explaining the real reason he disappeared. I'm 45 now. Female. I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. We lived in one of those middle-class neighborhoods that feels a little worn down around the edges but has just enough pride to keep the lawns mowed and the sidewalks mostly intact. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knows just enough about you to nod, but not enough to help if your life quietly collapses. My parents, Lorraine and Victor, bought that house on Parkview Terrace before I was born. I was their only child. From the outside, our family looked normal, maybe even boring. But inside those walls, it was always tense. My mom wasn't always angry. Or maybe she was, and I was too young to see it. She was sharp, opinionated, practical to a fault. She could cut a person down with a single glance, and she wielded guilt like a scalpel. My dad was softer. Quiet. He had this way of making a room feel calm just by being in it. He worked at a printing press, came home smelling like ink and paper, and read every night without fail. They didn't fight loudly. Not in front of me. But I remember long silences. Tense dinners. The kind of quiet where love used to be. The last day I saw him, I was 11. Early September, warm and sticky. He walked me to the bus stop that morning. He ruffled my hair and handed me a granola bar like he always did. He smiled. Not a forced smile. A real one. That's what haunts me. When I came home, he was gone. No note. No message. Nothing missing, except him. My mom acted confused at first. Maybe something happened at work, she said, pacing with a phone in her hand she never used. Hours passed. Then days. She called the police eventually, filed a report. I remember sitting on the stairs, watching her smoke cigarettes in the kitchen with one hand over her mouth like she was stifling a scream. But after the second week, something in her hardened. Like she had flipped a switch and decided he was dead to us. Except, she didn't grieve. Not like you'd expect. She got mean. The first time she snapped at me, I had spilled a glass of milk. She was exhausted, I thought. Stressed. But she just stared at the mess like it was radioactive, then said, "You're just like him. Weak. Useless." I remember those words more than I remember any birthday from my childhood. She started blaming me for little things. Then big things. When the mortgage payments got harder to make, it was somehow my fault. When the car needed repairs, she'd mutter under her breath about how I ate like a horse. Every mistake I made was proof that I was dragging her down. She stopped saying my name. I was just her. One night, I must have been around 13, I got home late from tutoring. My algebra teacher had stayed behind to help me catch up. I walked in, and she was sitting in the dark living room, drink in hand. I braced myself. It wasn't a new routine. "You're the reason your father left," she said, coldly, as if it were as obvious as the weather. My throat dried up. I didn't even respond. What do you say to that? I just walked past her, went up the stairs, and cried quietly into my pillow for hours. That phrase would come up again. And again. You're the reason. He left because of you. He couldn't stand being around you. And my favorite, everything wrong with my life is because of you. The worst part? I started to believe it. When I hit 17, I applied to a few colleges, mostly out of state. Boston University sent an acceptance letter and a partial scholarship. I remember holding that envelope like it was a ticket to the moon. I didn't even tell her at first. I hid it under my mattress. She found it 3 days later. We didn't speak. She just waited until I came downstairs for dinner, took the envelope out of her sweater pocket, and fed it to the fireplace. I didn't even get a chance to scream. The look on her face was calm. Almost smug. "You think you're leaving me too," she said. "You're not going anywhere." I didn't leave. I stayed in Rochester, enrolled at Monroe Community College. Waitressed in the evenings. Worked retail on weekends. I was good at pretending things were fine. Most of my friends drifted away, they had their own lives, and I had mine. Quiet, small, and full of obligation. Years passed. Nothing changed. She aged bitterly, clinging to old resentments like armor. And I aged alongside her, still feeling like a ghost in my own life. But everything changed on my 28th birthday. She never acknowledged birthdays. But this year, she had 2 glasses of cheap boxed wine and decided to reminisce. That's what she called it. You know, she said, not looking at me. He told me once, he couldn't stand the way you looked at him. Like you expected something. Like you deserved more. He left because he was weak. Just like you. I should have had the abortion. It was the first time she said that word out loud. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stood up, walked out of the house, and drove to my Aunt Maureen's place, my dad's younger sister. We hadn't talked in years. Not since I was maybe 15. But something in me snapped that night. I just couldn't go back. When she opened the door, she looked shocked. Not angry. Just surprised. I must have looked like a ghost, standing there in the porch light. She let me in, made tea. We sat in silence for a long time before I spoke. Why did he leave? I asked. She went quiet. So quiet, I could hear the old wall clock ticking in the hallway. Then she stood up, walked to a side drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. It was yellowed, tied with a red string. He gave me this the night he left, she said. Told me to give it to you when you were ready. I didn't open it immediately. My hand shook. My stomach twisted. But eventually, I untied the string and unfolded the letter. It was 5 pages long. Handwritten. His handwriting. The first words were, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay, but I still love you. He didn't leave because of me. He left because he was being abused. That word, abused, is hard to say when you're talking about a man. But he was. Quietly. Emotionally. Sometimes physically. He wrote about how mom would scream, throw things, lock him out of the house in the winter. How she told him she hated being a mother. That she resented me. That I was a burden. He tried to get help. No one believed him. Not the police. Not friends. Not family. He said he wrote letters to me after he left, birthdays, holidays, but she returned every single one. There were dozens. He had saved them all. Maureen had the box. I sat there until sunrise, reading each one. Letters filled with love, advice, missed moments. One had a pressed flower from our old backyard. Another included a drawing he'd made of me as a child, in crayon. He never stopped loving me. He just didn't know how to fight her. He chose survival. And in doing so, he lost me. But he never stopped trying. I stayed at Maureen's for 3 days after that. She didn't ask too many questions. Just made meals, kept the guest room clean, and let me sit in silence when I needed to. I think she knew that what I'd discovered wasn't something you just process overnight. It wasn't even grief, not exactly. It was more like having the entire narrative of your life ripped out from under you and being forced to rebuild it, word by word, memory by memory. When I returned home, if you could still call it that, I found my mother sitting in the living room, TV blaring some game show she wasn't watching. She looked up once, and didn't say anything. Neither did I. I went to my room, packed a suitcase, and began pulling my things from drawers, quietly, methodically. There wasn't much I wanted to take. Most of it felt tainted, like it belonged to someone else's life. She followed me upstairs about 20 minutes later. Leaned against the doorframe like she owned the place. Because, technically, she did. You think you found something out, didn't you? She said. Whatever lies your father told my sister, don't think for a second they're true. I didn't look at her. Just zipped the bag. She stepped into the room. He left us, Claudia. He left you. That's not my doing. That's his. I turned to face her. Finally, after all these years. He left you, I said. He tried to stay for me. But you made that impossible. The words didn't explode out of me like I'd always imagined. They were quiet. Controlled. Which made them sting more, I think. She stared at me, eyes narrowing. You've been talking to Maureen. She always hated me. That bitter little, he wrote me letters. For 17 years. That shut her up. He mailed them. She saved them. You sent them back. Unopened. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to catch up to the story. Or maybe she didn't think I'd ever find out. Maybe she thought her version of reality would be the only one I'd ever know. Do you want to read one? I asked. Do you want to see what he said? She looked away, down the hall, as if expecting an escape route to suddenly appear. I don't need to read lies, she muttered. You think he's some kind of saint now? He left Claudia. Doesn't matter why. He's gone. No, I said. He's not. That's when her eyes snapped back to me. Cold. Sharp. But I could see something else, too. For the first time, fear. She didn't ask for details. She didn't want to know where he was. And I didn't offer. I walked out of the house with my suitcase and my father's letters. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I just left. That night, I stayed in a motel off Monroe Avenue. Cheap, but clean. I sat on the edge of the bed and reread one of the birthday letters. My 12th, I think. He had written a story in it about a girl who built a sailboat in her garage, snuck it out in the middle of the night, and rowed it all the way to Nova Scotia. He ended the letter with, "You have the kind of heart that knows how to find the wind." I sobbed. Over the next few weeks, I made arrangements. I found a room to rent with a woman I met through a coworker at the diner. Small place, shared kitchen, but it felt like a step towards something I hadn't had in years, freedom. I picked up more shifts. I applied for a writing class at the community college. I even started therapy, which was a nightmare at first. But I kept going. The letters stayed with me. I read one a night. Sometimes two. It became my ritual. They filled in the blanks, gave me pieces of my dad I'd never known I was missing. One of the letters, dated the year I turned 18, talked about how he'd tried to send money, too. How he'd opened a separate bank account in Maureen's name, hoping to use it someday for my college tuition. But Mom found out and threatened to report him for harassment. Maureen never told me about that. Probably thought it was safer not to. Maybe it was. I started writing him back. I had his last known address. Maureen gave it to me, hesitantly. Said he was living in Vermont now, near Montpelier. Had a garden, a dog, kept to himself. I sent the first letter without any idea if it would reach him. It did. 2 weeks later, I got a postcard in return. A photo of a red barn surrounded by snow-covered pines. On the back, in that familiar slanted handwriting, were just 5 words, "I never stopped missing you." I held that card to my chest and just breathed. For the first time in a very long time, I felt anchored. My mother didn't call. She didn't try to find me. Didn't ask where I'd gone. Maybe she was glad to be rid of me. Maybe she thought I'd come crawling back. I didn't. The truth was, I didn't miss her. And that realization felt like freedom. Over the next year, my life quietly rebuilt itself in ways that once felt impossible. I moved out of the shared apartment and into a small one-bedroom in Irondequoit, not far from Lake Ontario. Nothing fancy, but I could see the water from my kitchen window, and that felt like a luxury after decades of living under a roof that felt more like a prison than a home. I finished my associate degree, finally, and started working full-time as an assistant for a local nonprofit that helped teens in crisis, many from broken homes. Some of their stories felt achingly familiar. I never told them mine, but I think they sensed I understood in ways others didn't. And then there was my dad. We didn't rush into meeting. Letters turned into phone calls. Phone calls turned into video chats. The first time I saw his face on screen, I cried. He looked older, sure. The hair was thinner, and his eyes carried more weight. But the moment he smiled, I was 5 years old again, sitting in his lap at the library while he read Charlotte's Web to me. When I finally made the drive to Vermont, it was October. The trees were on fire with color, and the air smelled like apples and wood smoke. He lived in a small, cedar-sided cabin nestled on a gravel road outside Montpelier. Mabel, the dog Maureen had told me about, was real, and very enthusiastic in her greetings. The garden was overgrown, but still lovely. Tomatoes, squash, basil. He handed me a trowel within the hour and asked if I still hated dirt. I told him I hated a lot of things a lot less these days. That weekend, we didn't talk much about the past. We just existed together. cooked, walked, watched an old VHS of To Kill a Mockingbird. But last night, sitting on his porch with a blanket around our shoulders, I finally asked him what he wanted. "What do you want, now that we found each other?" I asked. He looked out at the trees and said, "Peace. And for you to never feel like you have to earn love again." That's when I knew I couldn't just forgive and forget, not yet. Not without addressing what was still hanging over me like a storm cloud. My mother. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. Not a call. Not a birthday card. Not even a text. But through the grapevine, I think from Maureen, I heard she was struggling financially. She'd retired early from her hospital clerk job, assuming she could live off what Dad had left behind. The problem was, she never got anything from him. Dad never divorced her officially, it turns out. He filed, but she never responded, and the case lapsed. For legal purposes, they were still married until just a few years before I found him, when he quietly finalized everything through a Vermont court. And that meant, legally, she wasn't entitled to a cent. I knew she was still living in the old house. I'd always assumed she'd sell it once she ran out of money, but no. Pride's a funny thing. She stayed, clinging to the decay like it owed her something. And then the opportunity fell in my lap. The house had liens on it, years of unpaid property taxes, and missed utility bills. Enough that the county put it up for tax auction. I saw the listing by accident, one night while I was scrolling through a Rochester government foreclosure site, looking for properties for work. And there it was. 214, Parkview Terrace. Starting bid, $6,000. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called my dad. He didn't tell me not to do it. He just said, "Do what brings you closure, Claudia." So I did. I placed the bid. It was uncontested. Hardly anyone wanted that rundown, sagging old place anyway. I got the title for less than the cost of a used car. A month later, I walked up the porch steps of the house that raised me, and nearly broke me. She answered the door wearing the same faded housecoat she'd worn when I was a teenager. The look on her face when she saw me was somewhere between disbelief and disdain. "I'm not interested in catching up," she said, arms crossed. I handed her the envelope. "You should read this." She opened it. Inside was a copy of the deed. My name, in bold. And the letter I'd had a lawyer draft explaining that she was now a tenant. And rent was due. "You bought the house?" she asked, voice sharp, like she couldn't decide if she should be angry or impressed. "Yes," I said. "And you have 60 days. Unless you'd prefer to sign a lease." "Standard rate." Her mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. All those years of control, gone. The house, her sanctuary of bitterness, was no longer hers. She scoffed. "You think this is revenge?" "No," I said, evenly. "This is freedom." She slammed the door in my face. But 60 days later, she was gone. She didn't fight. She didn't plead. She just disappeared. Took whatever she could carry and left. I never found out where she went, and I didn't try to. I sold the house a few months later, after cleaning it out and donating most of the contents to charity. I kept a few things, one photo of me and my dad at the zoo, a wooden jewelry box that belonged to my grandmother, and a paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with my father's notes in the margins. The check from the sale? I donated half to the youth shelter I worked with. The rest I used to help Dad renovate his kitchen, and I finally took a long postponed trip to the coast, something he'd promised me when I was 8 and never got to do. Sometimes, revenge doesn't have to look like fire and fury. Sometimes, it's a quiet reclaiming of the space you were never supposed to survive in. I didn't destroy her. I didn't need to. I simply became everything she told me I couldn't be. And I did it without her.